Hi.
How
The
are
thing
you?
I love about the start, it gives me enough time to hit my do not disturb because I
That's
always say,
exactly what I do as well.
"Hey everyone, welcome."
Welcome. How are you?
It's I'm good, good. It's time to get back into it, right?
Yeah, I feel like you have to give yourself permission. I find a lot of people are like, well, if I don't stick to this, if I don't stick to this, there's a problem, blah, blah, blah. But sometimes life happens and you just kind of have to go, you know what? I'm just going to deal with life right now. And sometimes things need to be pushed off. So we did cancel last week because life happens. And I think that's okay. And I think people get too stressed and bogged down and all of that kind of stuff. And when life happens, sometimes something has to give.
And I think a lot of people too, if you guys are used to making videos and podcasts and content and everything else, if you don't really have anything to say, then don't do it.
Don't say.
So I mean that's it's the other side of it, but I mean it's very clear because sometimes we are trained by people that say do content every day, do 3 clips, do this, do that. But if you don't really have anything, don't just make noise because it's
Exactly.
not
Well,
worth
yeah, you do feel like you're talking for the sake of talking, which you're hearing your own voice for the sake of hearing your own voice. And if you don't have that value and you're not giving, or if you're not inspired to say something or give that value, then it's probably what was the old saying? Like, if you have nothing good to say, don't say anything at all.
exactly. And then I mean, so it's a good thing to keep in mind. And what came up, we usually bring our topics by what's happening with us or what's happening with our clients, our coaching, our community, etc. And last week on our coaching call, we talked to somebody and we really tried to find out what they did. What they did, what their process was, and what they could do with it. And what we came to the conclusion afterwards, after a lot of digging, was the fact that they could be a phenomenal podcast guest on a lot of really great podcasts if they could just get what they do down, right?
Out. Well, it's true because there is a huge trend right now, right? There's a lot of posts and maybe I see more of them because I live in the podcast world, but there is a huge trend right now about guesting on podcasts. So,
Mhm.
not necessarily hosting your own, but the content creators, find those hosts, get out there, put yourself out on podcasts, be a guest, all that kind of stuff. And I'm over here going, hang on. I agree 110% that guesting on podcasts can increase your visibility online and reach new people and all that kind of stuff. Absolutely. But before you jump on the bandwagon, there's probably some things that you need to think about. And number one being exactly what you just said, can you articulate and explain? Because what's going to happen is you're going to book it. They're going to arrange a time to do the recording. And probably one of the first questions they're going to say is, hey, can you introduce yourselves to the audience or to the listeners?
Right.
And if you don't say anything and there's crickets, that's going to be a little
And
bit of a
that's the
problem.
problem. I think most of the people that we coach say the same thing. They're dying to be a guest on podcasts because it's very simple to get out there in front of people, especially if you end up on a really great podcast, right?
Yeah.
With a huge reach. Really important, but most important before you even attempt to think about how you get on podcasts and writing people and telling them what you talk about, I think you need to answer the basic questions: who you are and what do you do?
Mm-hmm.
What's your story? Why are you doing what you did? Or why are you doing what you do? Right? So, what is your process? How did you come into this? And then, number three, which is really important, is what's your goal on being on the podcast?
Right.
Right? What's your goal? Do you want to, are you trying to reach more people because you want to get the information out? Are you trying to get them to follow you or come to your program? Or are you eventually trying to sell them something? Like, what is your goal? Doesn't matter what it is, but you need to have those 3 questions answered. Or to be honest, if you don't know what you do, right? And you don't
Yep.
know how you do it, process, you don't know what your story was, and you don't know why you're doing the podcast, then just sit back. Don't get on anyone's podcast because that's their business.
Well, I just find it very interesting. And you're absolutely right. I agree with all of that because If you show up without that, like let's just say you show up and you don't have your information, you don't know your why, and somebody asks you that question, you're going to stumble through it. You're not
Right.
necessarily give a good response. And what's going to end up happening is nothing, which means their
Right.
listeners are going to go, well, that really wasn't a very good episode. So it's going to look bad on the host. So now, and you're going to look bad. They're not going to go to your website. They're not going
Right.
to download that freebie that you're offering to that podcast audience, and you're really not going to get anything out of it. The interesting part, as being a producer, is that I see those, right? I have my clients come to me and say, I just did this interview and it wasn't good. They
Right.
weren't able to say what they did. They weren't able to give that value. And I'm really not sure that my listeners are going to like it. And is it valuable to put out? Like
And
that
on the flip side,
question
Stacey,
afterwards.
on the flip side, I would say as a guest, you have to walk into those podcasts and think that maybe your podcast host isn't very good. Okay. Maybe they're not. You have to walk in
Yep.
there as a guest saying they
Yep.
might not be prepared. They might not be a good interviewer because just because you're a good podcast host does not make you a good interviewer.
110%.
A good interviewer, even if the guest isn't prepared, can pull out right what they want to make it interesting. But you have to walk in there thinking, okay, maybe this person's not so good. So what am I going to make sure that I have in my back pocket to steer the conversation where I want it to go to make it look good, right? Because a lot of podcast hosts might ask the same kind of questions every time, which is very boring, right? And you might be ready for those, right? Which is fine, but how can you put something in it to make it more exciting? So it works both ways, right? Sometimes the guest isn't very good and sometimes the podcast host isn't very good. So you have to walk into it on either side and know how to steer the conversation.
Well, absolutely, because I agree with you. Just because you're a good podcast host and you can speak does not make you a very good interviewer, right? When we run the podcast mastermind, interview skills is part of that because it's not an intuitive thing. And you're right.
No.
How is the conversation flowing? What did they just say that you could ask further questions to? If you have a list of questions that you want to ask your guest, that is not a conversation. That is not an interview. That is a Q&A.
Right.
And that is very different from having a conversation and bringing a guest onto your podcast and saying, well, we're going to have a conversation about this. I'm going to interview you, that kind of stuff. Well, an interviewer makes the conversation flow to highlight the things that the guest is saying. A Q&A is, thank you for your answer. My next question is.
Right.
And then you ask those questions. And those are the questions, unfortunately, what ends up happening in the podcast space is a host will say, what questions do you want me to ask you? The
Right.
interviewee supplies the questions to the host, and the host asks those predetermined questions. The person being interviewed, again, has the answers already scripted because they know what the questions are going to be. And that ends up being a Q&A. And those, in my opinion, are very, very boring.
Yeah, they're always boring. When we train all of our clients in our community on speaking on podcasts, etc., it's always about trying to understand what your message is. You don't need notes. You want to make sure that you can talk off the top of your head and not worry about what your memorized answer was to the question, because everyone can tell it's memorized. Don't kid yourself. And here's the thing, I just want to ask our audience right now, if you have to memorize what you do, do you really know your stuff? Do you
Yeah.
really have a handle on it? Because you should never have to memorize what you do. And if you don't know your process, and this is the cool thing that came out of last week's coaching session, there's so many people that don't really know their process, right? They know they help people, they take people from A to Z, they move them through, but they haven't established their process. So don't go on any show and talk about how you help people if you can't articulate how you help people, right? If you can't articulate what your product is, your course is, your keynote speech, how you've made a difference in people's lives, how you came to that spot you are right now. If you can't articulate that, then you need some training. You need to get back and lay it all out. And it doesn't mean you have to hire a coach or anything, but you need to be able to lay it down and go, okay, how did I get my client from here to here? Or how did my product provide the solution that person was looking for? So it is very simple business 101 to know what you do. So if you can't get it out in a mouthful, then you need to ensure that you work on that message to make it come through at a reasonable interest level for most people, right? That's the other piece. Like if you're way up here and you're talking in scientific or terminology that most people don't understand, then that's equally as a problem. So dumb it down and be able to say it so that you don't know who's listening to your podcast, right? You don't know. So it could be somebody with a grade 8 education, or it could be somebody with a PhD. But you need to talk to that grade 8 education or 8th grade, depending on where you are in North America, so that you can make sure that person has you.
Well, I find it really interesting of what ends up happening. So from from the editing perspective, what ends up happening in that pre-scripted world is they say exactly what you just said. They explain it in some sort of, articulate way. They sound passionate about it. They really like what they said. And you can tell it was kind of coming from a place that's really good. And then halfway through, this has happened multiple times, halfway through they go, oh, you know what? Can we just edit that part out? Forget it. I'll just, and then what happens? So now that whole flow is interrupted.
Yes.
So as a producer, I now need to go back, take that part out. That sounded really good, by the way.
Yeah.
And then they end up talking it through, but they're reading it because now they want to have it the way that they have it written in front of them. So they're like, they introduce themselves and they talk about what they do, but now it's not coming from a place of a conversation. It's coming from a place of like getting information out in the way that they think they should. And it doesn't come across very well. Right. Mm-hmm. And then they go back, and I've had that happen both from an introduction perspective or, telling what they do, but also when they kind of get into the meat of the episode where they're talking about that information that they should know. And like you said before, they should know because this is their business, right? Mm-hmm. If you're talking about a topic that's your business, you should be able to talk about it off the top of your head. And then they say something that sounds really, and I find this more with solo episodes. So sometimes the host will start talking about something and they'll get really excited about it. And like, you know what? I don't really like the way I said that. So can you actually stop? And then they'll get into sort of it, but their voice changes. And then I think you're having a conversation with me and now you're not.
Well, as a host, you have to set those rules in advance saying we don't stop our podcast. Hopefully if it's live, it's a lot easier because then you can just say it's live. So we can't edit. But just say we don't stop it. We have the conversation, and that's what it is. So, so that somebody can come prepared, because shockingly, so many people think that they can, edit it in their best light, but that's not really what it's about. And I just want to make sure that, I know some people are going, well, I don't go on podcasts talk about my business. I talk about my experience and maybe some things that went on in my life. Yes, it's true. But we did say, know your story, right? So when you know your story, to pull out those 3 key points that will provide value for the listener. So don't ramble. Make sure that what are the key things that you really want to get across. So regardless of whether you're talking about your business, your life, somebody else, even if let's say you're doing movie reviews or concert reviews, same thing. What are those 3 key points that you want to make sure that you can bring out and they make sense and there's backup to them, unless it's obviously an opinion piece. But regardless, you need to make sure that you've got that in check, or you become, one of those guests that have a reputation of being bad and nobody wants you on the show.
Well, actually, it's really interesting because I find it, I don't want to use the word fun, but more engaging, I guess, when somebody on the show makes a little bit of a mistake.
Yeah.
Because what ends up happening is they'll be like, oh, you know what? Actually, instead of saying these 3 things, I'm actually going to add a bonus one. I know I said 3, but I'm going to do 4. Or, oops, was that the second one or the third one? Because you can,
Yeah.
I guess what comes across when they do that is they're laughing at themselves, which is kind of fun. You see a little bit of their personality. But what comes across, because we also have to keep in mind that from a video perspective, right? You're watching and listening, you're using 2 different senses. When you're in a podcast space, you're using audio only. That comes through in their voice of they just get so excited about what they're talking about. They almost lose track. Have I said 2 things? Have I said 3? It doesn't matter. I'm going to give you 10 because I'm just so excited to give you all of this value and all of this information. And that's what I think really comes across as being authentic, genuine, and kind of engaging. And you kind of go, oh, I really want to hear more because they love what they're talking about. Like you, when I hear you talk, when you're talking about like AI, for example, like you get so excited. You're just like, I just want to tell you more, which is amazing. Yeah. Right. And that's the kind of guest that you want. That's the kind of guest you want to be as well. And not just kind of answer the scripted question with your scripted answer and move on to the scripted question and follow up with the scripted answer. And then it's very, staunchy going, okay, well, thank you for participating in my conversation today.
Which is, I would say, I'm going to say the majority of podcasts sound like that. Sorry, I am. There's a lot of people out there that shouldn't be doing podcasts, but they believe that they just like either like the sound of their own voice or they want to gain exposure. But if you're going to give information or create something that's meaningful for people, then make sure that you're engaged in it. Because I mean, you can talk to your experience, Stacey, but I know that I've done several podcasts where the host isn't really paying attention because in their brain they have their questions right lined up, and so I'll answer, and then they'll ask another question, and doesn't go with what I just said at all.
Or you've already answered it.
I've already answered it. Yeah. So, and those, I mean, I know a couple, and I had to steer the entire conversation to make it at least interesting. So you have to be able to recognize as a guest if your host isn't very good. I mean, I hate to say it.
No, but it's true. Absolutely true. I think what ends up happening is that the host is listening for you to stop talking. Yes. They're not listening to continue the conversation. And I've seen both extremes. I literally, without lying, have the entire gamut. I have the Q&A. I have the listening for the conversation, even though they've already answered that question. Yeah. And then I do have the other side, which is, very good host, be able to steer the conversation, follow up questions, engaged in the conversation, listening to what they're saying. And sometimes the conversation goes in a little bit of a different direction, which is great because that's where the conversation's going. And that makes that conversation a really good one to listen to.
And it's great. Like, I mean, don't you love when you hear that as a listener, you're listening to a podcast and then they give you something that you didn't expect to hear.
Yeah.
And you're like, wow, that was worth listening to, just that bit of information. So you like I said, know your story, pull your little tidbits out of your little, toolbox and be able to throw them out when you need to, because, let's face it, there is so many podcasts out there and so much information that I make my decision on listening to podcasts in the first 30 seconds, maybe. Yeah. I literally, if your intro is too long and the host talks about themselves too long, I don't listen. If the guest seems like they're answering questions, I don't listen. So I need to make sure that I hear engagement right off the bat.
Yeah. And I think really I'm just going back to sort of what you do and how to articulate that. When you apply, even before you even get on the air, but when you apply to podcasts, most of the time they want a professional, they want a headshot because they're going to be using it in social media promo. Some hosts will have an agreement with their guests that, after this airs, the expectation is like, I'm going to do, 3 posts, you're going to do 3 posts, a video, a clip, that kind of stuff. But they're going to ask you for your bio. So that's another thing that some people don't even have their bio written. Right. So forget, speaking engagements, but just getting to the point that you're doing guests on podcasts, right? You need to have that bio. But from a host perspective, I think I would just caution you in reading the entire bio, because I think the value and the conversation that the guest has with you is going to shine. And if I want to learn more about that guest, that link will be there. It'll be in the show notes. I can go check it out. I can go to their website. I can read more about them. But I think front ending the long intro with that long bio, I think just takes away from jumping right into the conversation and can take away from somebody like yourself who might be really interested in listening to that topic. However, they're not there yet. And within 30 seconds to a minute, the guest hasn't even spoken yet. That's a long time to wait. I know it only says a minute, but it's a long time.
I'm going to caution you on your bios because you might spend two weeks writing the perfect bio, get onto the podcast, and the guest might say, "So tell our audience about you."
That's very typical. So the bio portion would be in the show notes. Yeah. So send them your short bio to leave in the show notes. Again, if they like you, they will go check you out. But more times than not, you will have the opportunity to introduce yourself on that show.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you've spent 2 weeks doing your bio, but you never really, owned it, you might have a beautifully written bio to put out in show notes, but actually saying it coming out of your mouth makes a massive difference. So you need to be able to ensure that, that you understand. You might have, even if the host said, "I'm going to ask you these questions," and none of them come up.
Yeah.
You can't just say, whoa. You're asking me questions I didn't agree to. I have to leave now.
Yeah, don't do that. That's as with anything. I mean, you think about TV, right? TV interviews, the interviewer has full range on asking you kind of whatever they want. And if you've supplied information, they've done their research, they've looked at your website, they know what you do, you've put information sort of in your application to be on their show, they can ask you really anything because it is their show and they can steer that conversation. Your answer, you can steer that answer as long as you're giving information. So being prepared, I think, would be a really good way to start. Before you even apply to be on a show or before you agree to it, make sure that you're prepared with all of the stuff you need ahead of time. But if a host says to you, "Here's my list of questions I'm going to ask you," make sure you have answers prepared. I would actually caution you to say that you may want to run in the opposite direction because just have the conversation. Like, I want to get to know you. Not knowing what the host is going to ask you can actually be a benefit to you and the host because it's an authentic conversation versus, "One sec, was that question 7? It's in a different order. 1 minute. Hang on. I think I need to get another piece of, where did I have that written down?" And you're expecting that the producer is going to edit all that out, which is why I liked your advice right in the beginning, which was, as a host, we're going to have a conversation. We're not going to stop unless there's a technical issue. We're just going to have the conversation and it's going to air as is.
Right.
So I think that's
it's important. And like, I think if you are thinking about it, you're listening to us and you're thinking about being a guest and you really don't have any speaking training and you don't understand how to pull out stories, we do that in our community. We teach in our Speaking Accelerator exactly how to be a guest, how to speak on stage. Everything rolls into the same thing. So if you figure out your signature talk and your story and your 3 or 4 points that you always go to, then you'll always be ready. So you don't have to prepare. Somebody can say, "Jump on our podcast today," and you can say, "No problem," because you know everything there is to know about you, your business, your stories, whatever you want to talk about, and it's great. But have that and make sure that you're there. Don't just say yes to a podcast and go, "Okay, well, I don't have any idea what I'm going to talk about." Because then there's
bad, unfortunately, and that will they will have a negative reaction to you and your business.
And I just want to point out on the other side, because because I'm usually a guest, right? We have podcast guests, but I'm usually a guest, and I've done some podcasts where they were just terrible hosts, like terrible hosts, and I've done podcasts. So I did a podcast that never aired. I found the podcast really boring because the host was they weren't paying attention. They were asking boring questions and I was steering it and being very animated to make sure they got information, and it never aired. And shame on you. You don't take somebody's time, right? and then all of a sudden not air it. And I think that they probably, this is my guess, they probably listened to and realized that they didn't look so good. The
Right.
host, not the guest.
The
The
host.
host didn't look so good, so they
Yeah.
didn't air it. And you know what? Don't waste somebody's time. If they've given you their time, then do it. You know, as a host, be fully committed, just like a guest. As a guest, you want to be fully committed to that 30 minutes, that hour, whatever you've designated. You show up and you give your best. Well, it's the same as for host as well, right?
Yeah, you show up and give. I can't emphasize that one enough. Unfortunately, I have seen a lot of guests not be fully present.
Right.
So, for example, if I say to you, Faye, would you like to be be a guest on my podcast, blah, blah, blah. We arrange a time, we agree. You've sent me all of your information and we're ready to record. And then you go, okay, well, I'm just going to go for a walk while I'm doing this. Well, you're not fully present. And I've seen it. I've heard it. I've had hosts, and clients come to me and say, can you take out where they're starting their car? Can you take out where they're walking in the path because I can hear their feet shuffling? Can you take out the dog barking or the person at the door because they've answered the door and they're having a conversation with somebody at the door in the middle of your show? So that really puts you in a negative light. It definitely is, in my opinion, a disrespect to the host who's also giving their time to showcase you on their show. So I think if you're going to commit to being a guest on somebody's show, then commit to being a guest and be fully present. It's the same thing as the host not being fully present. If they're, listening to something on the phone, or if they're on their computer and they're looking over here and they're just waiting for you to finish talking so they can ask their next question when you've already answered it, then that's actually a bad guest. So again, be present, have the conversation, and the conversation will flow for both of you in that capacity.
Right. So, I mean, and for those of you who are listening, who are not part of our community, if you visit us in our hub, we have some free training for podcasting in particular. And that goes on whether you want to be a host or you want to be a guest. So it really helps. Go out there. We're happy for you to join our community and get the information. But there's lots of information out there online. Just Google how to be a good, podcast guest, and you'll see a lot of that as well. But I think it's really important to understand whether you're good or not. And here's an interesting way to do it. Just if you've been a guest, re-listen to your episode. If not, just talk to anyone, colleague, friends, whatever, and just say, hey, what do you think I'm knowledgeable about? And what do you think I should talk about? And are there stories that you think I should tell? And let them answer the question for you, because sometimes, they'll come up with things that you never even thought about. Yep. And you're like, oh, wow, that was impactful for you. And you're like, okay, then that's what I'll use. So there's no excuse. Everyone can be a good guest. Everyone can be a good host. It's just about understanding those little tricks, those little tools that you need. Like I said, pull them out of your toolbox whenever you need them. And, they're your go-to stories. You tell go-to stories every single day of your life. Yeah. So now you just have to weave them into the conversation that you're having.
Exactly. And you know your business really well. So make sure that comes through and you're not looking at pre-scripted pieces of paper.
Right.
Okay. Well, thank you for that enlightening conversation. I hope a lot of people who are both hosts and guests, and I'm hoping my clients will know who's who, or maybe I don't want them to know the who's who of those ones, but that's okay. But I do see the whole gamut when they come to me for production services. Like I see the whole gamut, and it's just very interesting. And because I see a lot, people ask me for my opinion, and I'm just going to tell you, I will give you the honest opinion. So that is your choice. If you want the honest opinion, I will give it to you. So, but speaking of honest opinions, we are going to switch gears right now and move from our Hot Topics segment of the day to the Tech City, where we are going to showcase a particular program that we have been using for
5-6 years, probably.
Yeah. I don't even know where you found this particular program.
Yeah. Well,
I have it ready to show you on the screen, but you do the drum roll of what it is, and then how we
Okay.
use it, and then I'll show it.
Okay, so we just for everyone who's new to Tech City, who haven't listened to our other broadcasts, we try to find you inexpensive, great tech tools that you can use without knowing any technology. Last week and a couple weeks prior, we talked about a few of our favorites that came out: Taja, Pictory, Big
Big
View. I think
View.
we talked
Yep.
about a lot. So this one is an oldie but a goodie, and I'll tell you why it's so great. It's called ElfSite, and ElfSite is a collection of widgets for your website, landing pages, etc. So a lot of, for example, a lot of website hosts have widgets that you can bring in, but they are either very expensive or very limited. And when we were first initially building websites, we needed widgets. We needed something that would help us bring something in that the website hosting or program that we're using couldn't help us with, right? It couldn't
Right.
help us. And there's so many. So for example, if you go to somebody's website and you see an Instagram feed, right? You see all their Instagrams come up or all their YouTubes. Generally, it's a widget. So this is how easy it is. You go to ElfSite, you pick the widget you want, and then you connect it very simply with that social media feed you want. Then you can take that code and put it anywhere you want on your website. And every time you update your Instagram or your YouTube, it automatically updates on your website. That's just one type of widget. But if you go live to ElfSite, Stacy.
So what I want to do before I go live to ElfSite, what I
Okay.
want to do is just show exactly what you just said. So about your, so we have, as an example, on our Hot Topics page, so the mastermind.city/hot topics, where a lot of people do watch us live, and you're probably watching us live on this page right now.
Yeah.
But if you were to scroll down to the bottom of this page, that
Yes.
is an ElfSite widget that
Right.
showcases our YouTube channel with our Tech City. It shows our Hot Topics, and you can watch previous episodes all right there. And you can also subscribe to our YouTube channel right in the top right-hand corner of this particular box.
And the
So
cool thing to remember about this, guys, is because a lot of people think that they have to go and put every episode on their website, right? Oh, if I want somebody to go here. But this way, you do it once. You put a code in once, and it just auto populates.
I don't even have to think about it. The most recent will be there.
Yeah.
Which is
So,
really
and that's just one simple widget. If you go to our resources page, and I think Stacey will put that up in a minute, but if you go to our resources page, we have the link. So don't freak out about trying to figure out where it is and stuff. Anything that we use, we keep updated on the resources page. And as we're starting to get new ones in, we make sure we highlight them there as well. So because the number one question I think people ask us in our weekly coaching calls is, what are you using now? So
that is a big conversation. That's a huge conversation. What's the latest? What have you found? What's the cool tool? That kind of stuff. But if you go to our resources page, you can click on ElfSite, and just so that you don't have to try to remember URLs and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and you know that anything that's there is vetted. So we never talk about something we talk about things we don't like, but we would just never put them on our page. So the one thing that to keep in mind is, so in terms of widgets, a lot of different websites are bringing them in. So we use Kajabi, for example, which is one of our website hosts, which is a great, phenomenal. I think they're on there. Phenomenal software. Because they host web pages, landing pages, CRMs, you name it. However, they brought out widgets, and they're really, really expensive.
Yes.
Like, I was shocked because Kajabi is my go-to for most things. I was shocked at how much they wanted to charge for widgets. So ElfSite, you can get a whole package and you can choose. So when Stacy pulls it up, you'll see the volume of different widgets. So if you go right to the widget page, that I got to put my glasses on now because it's very small. So if you go, can you go to no, the front, not my apps. I want all of the widgets.
Yeah.
So you're logged in. We don't really want that. We want to go to to all widgets.
Wonder where that would be.
So if you, yeah, because you're logged in, didn't really want you to log in.
I'm going to log out.
Great.
I'm
So
going
go
to
to
log out and go elf site.
So 80 plus website widgets they have. And this is what I want you to see. This is it. Now look at this. Instagram feeds, Google reviews, WhatsApp, all-in-one reviews, Facebook feeds. You can continue to go. Age verifications, pricing tables, cookies, form builders. We use form builders.
Yeah.
We use a lot of these. Photo galleries, Twitter feeds, you name it.
The
So
event calendar we use a lot as well.
yeah, audio players, sliders, you name it. So, and here's the cool
And
thing.
we also use one of the ones that we use as well, which has been really helpful and interesting. So just to bring it back to what we were just talking about, which is podcasting, is there's actually a podcast feed from Elf Site. So yes, Apple gives you a code from Apple Podcasts that you could put on your site, and it's a player and it shows some other episodes. But this particular widget enables you to customize it completely so that you can have a very simple widget on your website. But the background, you can change the background image. You can change the information that's there. So do you want a play button? Do you want to have the episode title? Do you want to have the description? What aspect of this? And there's literally going, yep, I want to have this. I don't want to have this. And you literally turn them on and off, and you can have a customized widget right there for your podcast player. So everything that you could want. I just wanted to bring it back to the podcast conversation, but I really loved that one.
It's just everything. I mean, we use a lot of them, and I used for some of our other clients. We've used the forms because they didn't have intuitive forms. There is chats. There are feeds. You name it. There's so many things. Even like you can see, you can put your business hours. You can put an announcement bar. How many people, the hello bar, the announcement bar on top of their website. A lot of people would love that, but it's not ingrained into their website, and they don't know coding, and you don't have to. And if you go into any of these, just click one. Maybe they'll show it to us. Yeah, that's great. So if you go down to here, what happens is it will give you, see the different choices you can have and the colors and how it's laid out. Very straightforward. You do not have to be a designer because they do it all for you. All you have to be able to do is add the URL of your Instagram, for example, and it pulls everything, and then it'll say click copy, and then you go to your website, and where, depending on what website you have, you either just enter a custom code or you enter it a line, how depends on which one you have. But phenomenal piece of software. It is definitely my go-to. There are other ones out there. I haven't found one that is this extensive, like we said, 80 plus. And if you go to the left hand, there's a nav bar on the left hand side up at the top, and it'll give you by specific categories you want. So you want a video one, you want audio, you want whatever it is, e-commerce widgets, whatever you need. You will look at it, and then they'll give you some. So there's e-commerce, countdown timers, pop-ups, sales notifications, you name it. Really, really cool. We have a few, more than a few on our website. So, but you wouldn't know. That's the whole point. You don't know that it isn't the code isn't ingrained right into the website. You wouldn't know.
I think that's the part that I love about this is how clean it looks. It's not like there's a flashing light saying this is an Elf Site widget. It's very clean. There's no sort of branding or anything like that. It literally takes your information of how you've customized it in Elf Site. You put in, it's a one and done. Yeah. Literally, you take the code, you put it on the website, and then that's exactly how it looks. There's no, this widget's by Elf Site. There's no extra information or anything around it. It's very clean looking. And what I like, again, is those customized things that you can tick on and off to make it your own.
And the forms are spectacular. I mean, the forms are really impressive. You can make forms, for example, like if you use some forms where you implement and it's just what's on the page, but you can like literally customize it so that you have several pages to go through as you fill out the form rather than put it all on one page. There's so many great things. For one of our clients who is a franchisor, we have their whole franchise application on it. So it's really, really simple for the company. And then what happens is if you have a form, you can click the button that says notify me when the form is filled, and boom, there it is. You get it in your email. And you can also obviously log into your Elfsight account anytime to see what's happening on that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's interesting is the social feeds. I just want to go back to the social feeds for a second, because I know a lot of people want that, which is why it's probably at the top, because I think that just adds that value at the bottom. So you can kind of, when you go to a website and you're checking somebody out for the first time, you can see the type of posts that they put on right away. Sort of, sometimes they have it at the bottom. So I do really like the social feed widgets. I think it's really helpful, because I remember a few years ago, so it was like, how on earth can I get my Instagram feed on my website? And we're like, well, that's easy with Elfsight. Again, the oldie but a goodie. And I think there are like all of those websites that are more like a self-service website. All of them will have sort of a section that'll say custom code. Don't be afraid of those, because that's one thing about Elfsight that I really love, is that it's very, very simple to kind of go copy, paste, and it looks amazing on the other side. And if just, if you do run into any issues at all with Elfsight and you're like, I just can't seem to get this over, I'm doing everything it kind of says, I just can't. Elfsight support is top notch. Like, absolutely. I was actually having an issue with a community that we used to use, and I couldn't get it to work. And I contacted Elfsight. They reacted immediately. They were like, okay, you know what? Boom, boom. And they were able to fix it, I think, within a few hours. So they're very, very good about, if something's not working the way that you think it should, or if you're having some technical issues, getting it onto your site, they're very helpful. So I just wanted to point that out too.
So it's a big one. It's well worth it. It's very affordable, and you can pick a package. So if you only need, a couple of widgets, or you want, like us, we want a lot.
We want them all.
We want it all. So, but again, it's one of those ones, we look at the millions of software bundles we have bought. And every year we always go down the list and go, do we need this? Do we use this? Do we need this? We never even talk about Elfsight because we always use it.
Well, it was actually interesting. We had a blimp of time. I'm just going to be completely transparent. We had a blimp of a second where we questioned it, because we thought that our, at Kajabi, which we talked about before, they were coming out with widgets, and we're like, okay, well, if this works on our site, maybe, because we have so many programs, and we do, again, always go through the list to see if we can pare it down. And we immediately, probably within about 5 seconds, went, nope, we're never giving it else.
I mean, and I'm sure that some of the widgets they have are great. I mean, we're big fans of Kajabi. We recommend them all the time. They're 100%. On our resource list. We have all our websites. Most of our websites are done with that. However, we're just really shocked at the pricing. It was very expensive to put to just add one widget. It was just really price prohibitive. And when you looked at what you can get with Elfsight, there was no comparison. So yes, if you want to make it all integrated and you think it's just easier to stay on your website and you only need one, okay. But if you want to be able to do what you want and not worry about price so much, this is a yearly. This is not an AppSumo thing. This is a yearly subscription. Once you start with them, renewals come in. They always offer you special pricing. So I would strongly suggest you try it out if it's your thing, right?
Yeah.
Don't just buy it. Remember what we always say with our software. Don't just buy it because we use it. Buy it because you know that you will use it.
And however, I'm just going to say we do love it. Absolutely. We use it. It's
All
not
the
one that
time.
we've just trialed. We do,
No.
that's why I wanted to show you in the beginning that we do have it on our page. We have it on multitude of different pages. And from a technical perspective, I think I just love the ease of it.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't want you to be, because a lot of people are going, hang on, I don't want to get involved with code. You're not getting involved with code.
No.
You're literally, if you can copy and paste, that's all you will need to do because Elfsight does it all for you. So there's no technical information that you need to know. You can change colors, you can change what appears, you can kind of customize, and that gets really fun. And then copy paste and you're done. And it looks exactly the way it does on Elfsight. So I just think it up levels the look because you can make these personalized and branded to the way that your business looks.
Yeah. And if you're bored with your website and you think it needs some oomph, this is it.
Oomph.
Right? This is an easy way to do it without having to hire a designer or a coder or anything. It's just plug and play and you're good to go. And your website looks much more polished and finished.
Absolutely. As opposed to integrating, one particular program, because us, we like to keep things, as simplistic as possible as well. So instead of, I'm grabbing a form from over here, I'm grabbing the Instagram feed from over here, I'm grabbing my Google Maps from over here. Like you're trying to get 500 things together and work them all together and duct tape everything together. And I think that's what we both used to do. This solves a lot of problems for that. And it does enable you to kind of have that one space. You can get some stuff and make your website look amazing. So,
yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, that is Elfsight. I encourage you to go try it if that is something that would work for you. And I'm going to just really quickly, if I can find it, put the resources page because that's where it is. So just go to themastermind.city/resources. And you will find all the resources that we use, and Elfsight is there as well. So you don't have to try to Google or remember URLs. You can just go to that one and there's a link right there.
And check back next week because we will bring you another software that we're falling in love with.
Only one? One at a time.
We could do one a day, but we're going to
That's true.
Keep it simple, guys.
All right, guys.